coordination points in every working group. They can achieve that. Like, for example, Sampo can still have clarity, doesn't change anything, but it doesn't matter that for the rest of the communities on the working groups, I feel we have this level of awareness. I think the Zen Hub is not what is wrong. It's just the way it is structured. It's not even wrong. It's just the way that it's structured at the moment.
Use it. Yeah.
It's not very efficient because the awareness gets gated to the people who attend this call, and is gated to usually the stewards, no one else. So we don't actually have awareness, and there is no coordination between working groups because the only people who knows what's going on is the steward. So I feel like for me, I will suggest like, hey, if you are receiving compensation for any role on the TEC, you should join this call. And it's sort of a mandatory kind of thing. It's not mandatory, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I like one of the things that I don't know. I think having everybody's issues on the Zen Hub board also makes it really inaccessible. Like trying to filter through exactly all these issues, and some of the issues are more like aspirations, not even tangible goals for that particular sprint. And so one of the things that I would like to see is like a very simple Zen Hub board. Like here's 5 different epics. We all choose what epic to swarm to. And so if you're in Communitas, you say, oh, okay, how can I help achieve that epic? And then you can have your own Communitas working group, like issues that you work on. But they're not necessary to achieve for that series. But I think having a collective understanding of like the direction of where we're heading as a community, I think is really, really important, and something that we're missing from this current setup that we have.
Yeah, I think that simplicity, for example, I found that when I put the new proposal for the next term for Communitas, I create an epic that matched that funding proposal. So that's the direction where I'm going. And I feel like we should scale that kind of process for like, you remember when we're doing the token or we're doing the design and so on, there were these critical labeled issues that made very simple to understand that all need to stop but this, because this needs priority. So for me, this seasonal, whatever you want to call this amount of time that everyone is focused on 1 or 2 things, should be a separate board, or should be just a column separated from the rest, and a column that says this season or something along those lines. And in that season, we'll keep track of all the aligned issues that needs to be focused and prioritized. The same way we were using for the token design back in the day. It's just that this will be more on the MVV, or more of a season, or whatever happens now. So, yeah.
And so you think we should stick with the individual issues within the Zen Hub?
I think one of the very few things that I think are really helpful, and they are tiring maybe, but I feel they're really helpful. It's the common practice of, if you wanna be accountable, just create an issue for the task that you say you were gonna do. That simple ask, I feel it's the minimum that we can ask for anyone receiving funds from the TEC. It's really simple, and maybe it's unbearable in the sense of how many things there is on that board. But that action, maybe it's not a sense, but that action of just keeping this common place where everyone knows that they have to put their issues in order to be transparent and compensated, that's a very simple ask that I feel we should keep.
Okay. What are your thoughts on it, Zefty?
Yeah, I really like the idea of having epics that must get done, and then if we like, I really what you said, Nate, really resonates with me. That's a way so we can guide the direction of the commons, and then at the same time, people can still do other work that is not in there, but the epic must get done. Then other things are, if they get done, that's cool, but they are not the first thing. So I kind of agree 100% with what you said.
Yeah, and Edu, I'm like looking at the issues right now, and I think there's like maybe 5 or 6 of us that actively participate in creating or monitor, like editing issues. And I'm not sure if that's just the inaccessibility that we have from newcomers and members, and like you said, steward gatekeeping type of thing, or if it's just that's nobody else has an interest in actually doing that.
In editing the issues.
Yeah, or just creating issues or keep updating them.
But that's because after the launch of the token or the process, we sort of, since the technical team stopped sort of using GitHub in that recurring base, we just sort of dropped the ball on that. But not because I think it's just that it's just that we dropped the ball because there was no race, there was no goal or horizon where we were all aiming to. So, but I think it's just a call for redo a little bit the board. For example, I don't know. For example, if I delete all the board, that will affect the reward system or source code. I don't know if source code is taking information from GitHub to. I don't know. I'm just saying an example. Like, so for me, I will just probably create a um, very simple minded board parallel to this one or a new one. I don't know, but
Yeah, I almost kind of want to just go through these issues and just start deleting. I mean,
yeah, I think at some point there could be coordination that it's external or internal, and maybe there are things that we can coordinate internally on SendHub, and then we can just simplify it on a very simple Open 21 Notion. The thing about using SendHub at the moment is that we rely on giving people access to GitHub, and then that's the barrier entry. That not everyone have access to GitHub. So for them to edit the issue, they need to have access to GitHub and or at least be named on that issue.
yeah. So we have, and how many people would you say were either unwilling or unable to sign up for GitHub?
I remember, for example, Gene for the longest time he couldn't do anything because he and it always happens. But most of the people doesn't know. We just dropped the ball. A lot of the newcomers doesn't know that we track things on GitHub or SendHub. So for me, it's just like, hey, let's simplify it. Let's take out some of this gating thing and just do a free Notion kind of thing and just put all the things in Notion and just simple goal driven board. That's it.
Yeah. I mean, and so one of the things that I'm like I get confused about is like, if I'm a contributor within, Communitas, do I really, what is the benefit of knowing what's going on in Gravity? Like we want to have this kind of complete information about the entire thing, but I think that's what stewards and the leaders of the commons are responsible for, is that distributing that information across working groups.
I will challenge that idea that
Okay.
if we are in a commons that aspire to use the model of token engineering, only focused on one aspect of token engineering, could be Omega, or could be Communitas, or could be Sampo, it won't be in consonance with the spirit of a token engineering system that needs to have different layers. I'm not saying everyone has to participate, but at least everyone should have a level of awareness, or they are invited to have a level of awareness about what's going on, just because this kind of space, in order to be a full token engineering aspiring space, needs to have this also awareness level on the other layers that are not necessarily the ones you're working on, because they articulate each other. So if we were, for example, this is an example that it came from the mistake and then it was corrected. ENS DAO is not a DAO anymore. It's a funding layer because they figured out that they didn't need a DAO, actually. It's not a social space. They don't need contributors. They don't need any of that. They just need projects who works on ENS. So they deleted the ENS DAO in concept, and now it's a funding layer. And that's it. So they simplify it to a way that it's easier to articulate. So in that case, for example, I will say if I work in ENS funding layer, I don't need to know what's going on the foundation. I don't need to know what's going on because that system it's focused on development. It's a technical system, very focused. No need to have overlap of other layers because there is no other layers, only the governance layer. But here is not the case. We are talking engineering system, and I feel that having only one side of the coin will be you will be missing. And yeah, so
No, I agree, and I guess just how do we remove that kind of barrier from individuals? The hard
that's
part. Hey Tam, I think
we
we
were
are. Yeah, go ahead.
we were about to give up and leave the call. You're muted.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah. I mean, almost everyone is on vacation, So do we just want to say we cancel this sprint? Do you want to pause sprints? What were you guys, what do you guys think?
We were having a sounding board session regarding what to do with the board if we need to revisit the same way we have revisited the community call, the orientation call, and all this call. That we needed to revisit the process of retrospective, and then Nate was suggesting two different things, and then we were just back and forth.
Yeah, cool. Happy to jump into this conversation too. I also think the sprint plan, and I'm saying this to everyone, I think we started out too big and it got us pretty far, but the sprint planning with across 12 work groups with 15 students just doesn't make sense anymore. So I'd love to do something else and just to have the sprint, like what should happen really is each working group does their own planning. And then, that just happens as a cycle. And then the sprint planning is for like the commons sprint planning and not for every working group that, maybe isn't necessarily like they have their own sprint planning or their own their own project management, their own, management in their working groups. But I think having everyone do it on the sprint board.
concern he had was like the accessibility to things like the Zen Hub board, and that's what kind of prevented people from participating for a lot of it. But maybe I don't know. Eddie, you probably sorry, you explain.
Yeah.
Perspective.
So I challenge that idea that I do believe that every working group should have their own system if they want to organize themselves. But I see so much positive in having this common space and common ground for everyone to be aware of what's going on in a detailed way. And I was suggesting that rather than having the stewards sort of only on this conversation, be more of a contributors call kind of format. And that for people who are receiving compensation, that this should be a must to be kind of space because it helps people. For me, is this idea of talking engineering and the layers and this perception that if you're working only on your area without any kind of awareness of what surrounds you, you are not a talking engineering. You're not doing a talking engineering approach. Doesn't mean you need to be involved in all the layers. It just means that you could be helped by having awareness about the other things around you.
I bristle at making anything mandatory for compensation because timing, time zones, all of this can be blockers to, well, first of all, I think making a 2-hour meeting mandatory to receive compensation is probably too heavy-handed, but also practically speaking, not achievable. I think it's difficult enough for people to find an hour a week that works for everyone, even an hour a month that might work for all contributors. But I think also I feel really strongly here. What you said about having it be more open, not more open, but more like, I think all of the sprint plannings should be open, but they're not going to be effective if they are not focused on specific streams of work. It's a project, not 12 different projects. So I think that they should be more focused on specific pieces of work. And it's super helpful to have a view across all of the different streams of work. But I would say, I like I mean, any call is open. We could always have people join and participate. But yeah, there's some pieces of work that I just feel like have to be focused on, in exclusion of the other pieces of work that could happen, at the side. Like, maybe especially a working group like Omega or Gravity or Labs, that are like, okay, we don't need to essentially know exactly what they're doing or require MERT or, YGG or, or Wonka even to be in these sprint planning calls, but everyone is welcome to join. Something like that.
Right. So, hello, Libby. So, my suggestion there is impossible to have a 2 hours call for everyone, but it would be different if, for example, we encourage that working groups will have this coordination layer within their calls, within the coordination calls. So the last 10 minutes of all working groups could do this, and they do a check-in on this, and then only the focused or most relevant according to the season issues or planning comes to the retrospective. So the contributor who is working on something relevant to that season comes to retrospective, update, shares, and so on. So it will be a focused only retrospective, and then we'll leave the rest of the coordination of the working groups to the working groups within their weekly sync. So we will have this time only for focused season, theme, whatever you want to call, actions, and contributors who are working on that can have aware of what other working groups are doing on the same topic or the same subject or on the same season. So you will have at least these people focused.
I'm not super following.
So if we have like a more objective driven, I was using the example of when we were doing the token, and then when we had this label was named critical, and the critical label helped us to focus on which things were priority, and we even give more time to Griff to explain and with respect. So doing something very similar to have this mission driven or objective driven smaller seasons or sprints, whatever system we found is better, and then only the critical, let's say critical for that objective issues or task comes to these meetings and shared. And we also decentralize from the stewards, but the contributors who are working on these issues from those critical things. So if I think now regarding, for example, 12 rune, it will mean Sampo. It will mean maybe someone from comms or someone from communities who is engaging with other communities to let them know about this, or like having these two people will be the only ones speaking on this meeting because those are the objective of this sprint. Let's say Sampo and the 12 room group. So everyone will have awareness of this and blah, blah, blah. So something along those lines, and we keep the coordination for every working group within the working group, not on this call necessarily.
Yes. Go ahead, Tim. Sorry.
I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
No, I think that being able to even have that coordination be extended, like escalated to the community within sprint planning, I think is a really interesting concept where we say, okay, if it's important, if it's critical, if it's something that needs to get done quickly, package it into an epic, submit it for the community sprint planning call, and make your case for it, why this is important, why the community should help you in developing this very, very quickly, and get everybody on board in terms of like whether it should be prioritized or not. Because I think that if you have working groups submitting those issues that we're going to vote on or decide what we're going to focus on for that sprint, I think it kind of solves that challenge and allows us to kind of have this conversation of prioritization. So like when we get to sprint planning, we start talking simply about what we want to focus on. That is the only thing we're having a debate, and then we're deciding. And I think that kind of puts us all on the same page and allows us to communicate better with each other about what's going on in the working groups.
Yeah, Sam, I just saw your comment that's what Token Log does, and we chatted a little bit about it because Nate brought this idea in the Stewards Council, and it sounded like awesome that we can have this coordinated prioritization. And then I thought we could just start using token log because we have the issues already. Then the community could vote on what is a priority for the TEC. We could invite community members to create issues even with no owners. And maybe that issue is upvoted, and then we see that that's a necessity that the community has, and someone could jump into it.
I'm not, yeah, I think these are good ideas to experiment with. In my experience, having many steps in a process is not necessarily the fastest way. So I think this is a really great idea. Maybe I could see if we need to do something quickly, like, okay, this sprint, we need to finish this one important thing, it actually being slowed down by saying, okay, we have to now present it to the community, wait for feedback, incorporate the feedback. So I think that there's some, I guess it's like where we're zooming in, right? Like, what are the big priorities to focus on? I think is a community decision. The execution maybe is not necessarily as interesting to the community, or even the best use of anyone's time if we try to engage the community on how to execute.
So I will suggest that we keep this token log decision for high level kind of objectives. So for example, we can have this same format that most organizations have in the DAOs, like every 6-month period of times you have a new season, and then you reevaluate, reassess, and reframe your objective. So every 6 months, every 3 months, we can have this same token log votation only for these times. So for at least the proposition of what will be the next objective. The community doesn't need to vote on every part of the execution, just in the general idea, high level concept. And then if the community decides that this one or that one is the one that we're gonna work for the next 6 months, maybe that's sort of worth taking a shot. But I don't think having token log for every sprint, for example, will be helpful. I think that's a little bit too much.
Yeah, it just is not going to be it'll introduce inefficiencies.
I like that idea, and to have a 6 months focus, or maybe even 4 months.
Yeah, and I feel like now with the 12-room group sample strategy, we are from different aspects sort of finding this rhythm that could be helpful to explore and to also help us to reassess our own priorities. Like an in-place self-checking that I feel we have missing, because I feel at a certain level we are discoordinated. So for example, let's say Communitas do the self-checking in August, but then Stewards do the self-checking on September, and that brings on coordination awareness level, because we are not on the same sort of page, and we are mismatched timings. So if this conversation, for example, about the Stewards change will happen, we will reassess or re-talk about this at the same time the rest of the changes will happen. It could be really interesting, I feel like, to have this overview and overlap of feedback and changes, and put in place a mechanism that keep us on track and with the cards on the table, if that makes any sense.
So I guess my question is if we finally come to a consensus on what to do about this sprint planning, how do we actually implement it? What is the like? I think this is the time period where we actually attempt to implement it. Like, I think we should do it as quickly as possible in terms of while people are on vacation and things are they can come back to an organized type of sprint planning situation. And kind of go, educate them on the new method. And I guess we should have a advice process, but I don't know. What do you think?
I would say quickly that it could be a really nice timing to do this because of the new contributors. So we could sort of do this soft experimentation with the new people who are in and see how it also works. Sorry, Lily, go ahead.
No, yeah, I think this would actually be a good snapshot vote because we haven't had the chance to involve the community on deciding how the stewardship happens in a very direct way. And this could be something that we engage, like that we bring people into this discussion, because I think a lot of people would have something to say, you know, on the direction of the TEC, and then bringing stewards more in this role of like, what are the waters we're in, and how are we like stewarding the direction to where the collective is coming. So help stakeholders have an understanding of where we're trying to go, and then have advice process, but bring it maybe a few options to, or just reiterate in snapshot.
Well, there's different layers there, right? There's like the direction of the TEC, the stewardship of the TEC, and then the coordination. And I think they're all pretty well tied together, but they are pretty separate. Like the changes that we do with the stewardship will also impact how we do coordination for the working groups and for the commons.
Yeah, so it'll require kind of an order of approval in terms of how we go about it. Because if, you know, I don't know. I think out of all of those things, the structure of stewardship might be the most contested or most challenged type of alteration, but I don't know. I can't really pick up on community sentiment on that subject right now.
I will say bluntly that there is no community sentiment on stewardship. That's it's. I don't think there is an attachment to the figure. I think it's valuable from the community perspective, but I don't think there's an attachment to that. I want to welcome just Gideon and Juanca to the call, and we are debating a little bit about retrospective. So you're welcome to join the conversation. Tim.
Yeah, sorry to be late, folks. Just missed it.
Thank you. Sorry for being late.
No worries. It's Friday. Just talking about sprint planning. So, I mean, we do have enough people here to talk about it, but I'm not sure if we go back or we just trust everybody to update their issues right now. Should we go ahead and go through it?
I'm sorry, Mike. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, I really like the idea of having this token log thing, so token holders can signal what the things they want to get built, and then we could use the sprint planning just to see who will lead all those epics, who would be like the best person, and someone that's of course like willing to do it. Like the best person might be great, but if he don't want to do it, like we need to get like connected the two things, like who's the best person to do it and the willingness of doing it. But I think that would give the community a direction.
And I just want to say I like the idea of voting, but I don't think that it is feasible in terms of, the people who are going to be voting, are they going to be the people that are in the room at that sprint planning? And so that could be everybody, it could be nobody. And so I don't know if having, disparate token holdings within a single meeting to decide what we do is the right. I'd almost rather be like, hey, let's put it to a vote within this call. So if you want to vote on this next sprint,
but then you're closing it. Like you can have like the vote that the issues are there, and then you got like the whole week, or we should do a plan on how to do that. But then everyone is welcome to vote. Like the whales, contributors, everyone is welcome to vote. And in the worst case scenario, like no one is voting. Okay, this room that is gathering right now is decided. But at least people have the option to vote.
I think a great idea would be for whoever wants to really quarterback or like champion this to write down something that we could then evaluate. Because one of the like, and even maybe go through the exercise of like what kinds of things are being voted on. Because the purpose of Token Log was really to allow token holders to add features to products. So software development, new features to development products. We're using GitHub as coordination. So we're not building features for the community. We're coordinating our work streams to be effective. And the people who know best how to best coordinate their work stream are the people in that work stream and not necessarily the community. So there may be some other kind of repository that we have where we allow the community to vote on certain things that make sense. But I don't know, I don't think for a coordination repository, it necessarily makes the most sense for the people that aren't executing the work to decide what work needs to be done for that working group, if that makes sense.
So my only
Thanks for. Sorry, just something quick. Yeah, thanks for articulating that way, Tim, because I think what we are missing is you said, oh, people in the work streams know what's best for that work stream, but maybe what we're missing is the signal from the community of what is desirable even for that work stream, or what work streams are not there, or like, accessing a little bit the collective intelligence of what could be done, even if people don't want to take ownership for it, but just for us to understand what is in the mind of token holders. I don't know if that was.
Yeah, actually, can I piggyback? I'd love to piggyback on that because I think this is hitting on two things that I really believe as well. The first is that I do think it's hard for people outside of like a work group that's very close to. I mean, we've actually seen this in praise too. Like, I think sometimes it's difficult for people who are not close to the work to actually accurately quantify work. And I think it's the same thing when it comes to evaluating which particular strategy or path to go down. Context really does matter. But having said that, Livy, I want to also, I love the fact that these two, you, Tam and Livy, you both brought these things up because I feel strongly about this. I think I don't know if we need voting on these kinds of issues, but I think we definitely need some type of sense making, like almost like it's like a sensor, it's like ways of listening to the desires of the stakeholders, like the builders who are building stuff, but even more broadly, the people we need to attract, like the future users of the services we're going to be building. We really need some listening devices for being able to pick up on what's of value to people. And I'd love to see us just, maybe iterate on some simple versions of that. I think that would take us a long way.
And I just want to make one last comment with in terms of this, the purpose of doing things like in this manner. It's not so much for me as to prioritize certain issues over others. I think the real value here is collectively deciding how to get something done within the community. So, for example, if you have an epic, you may not know the tasks to make up that epic, but I think that this is what sprint planning should be used for in our context. Because, if we come to the sprint planning meeting, the first thing we should decide on is which one are we going to focus on for that sprint planning, and then we discuss as a group, as a community, as working groups, how we can contribute to executing on that goal of executing on that initiative. And so what can my working group do to contribute to this effort? What can I as an individual contribute to this effort? And kind of mapping out what tasks need to be done for that to happen. And so I think that the collaborative nature of trying to get working groups working with each other instead of being isolated and saying, I have my issues, they have their issues, And even though I'm aware of it, I'm not really doing anything to contribute or help or support, even though most of the tasks that we have within ZenHub right now require involvement of multiple working groups. It requires the approval of multiple people within different working groups. And, we assume that you're just going to take care of that on your own. And a lot of times, I think a lot of people have obstacles in terms of achieving that. And so I think the sprint planning could be really beneficial to getting all the working groups and all the individuals within those working groups and working streams to coordinate on one initiative.
I mean, like that's the intention, right? So everyone is aware of the interdependencies between the working groups. That's why we started using Scrum. But what I would say is we have outgrown it with the size that we are, and so there maybe has to be some way to either move things separately, like have 2 different scrums or more, or I'm leaning towards asking the working groups to make their own decisions about how they organize themselves and participate in the Commons Scrum, but maybe the Commons Scrum doesn't have every single working group in it necessarily. And then sort of pulling in Eduardo's recommendations around having, the season, maybe it's like and maybe our seasons are quarters and we look at every quarter for what the goal is for that quarter. And then there's working groups who may or may not have things to contribute to that. But then the Commons Scrum focuses just on that objective for that quarter. And that's really what the Scrum is about. So it achieves like the focus without making it, with respecting the sort of scalability limitations of coordination efforts for this size.
I agree on that one.
I really like that direction. I think it's what I like about that is having some longer time frames within which we set some priorities, right? Like bi-weekly, I think is too short. And I think sometimes it's just human nature, to be in a meeting and think that one thing is important in a given moment. And then, you get out of the meeting and a week goes by and you're like, oh, why did I pick that, right? Versus like a slightly longer term horizon where there's a more deliberative process where we're coming together to pick just 1 or 2 things that is the focus for, let's say, a quarter, or a season. I think that's going to be way more powerful for us, and may actually reduce the number of meetings that we need in order to coordinate around those higher level goals.
Yeah, so I guess is there, I don't know, Cam, you may know this, but is there a kind of a method for that, like where we have this kind of sprint planning on a larger scale in the seasons, and then have these small touch periods in between?
I mean, it's not like what the framework that I would say is there are quarterly OKRs, and the scrums are designed to be short so that you can adapt to changing dynamics, right? So I would say there's scrums that support the quarterly OKRs is how I would look at that happening.
Okay. And like, what would you define as brief, or like kind of a short scrum, or like a brief, a most efficient version of a scrum?
I mean, so for the sprint planning, it depends on the type of work that's happening, right? Some pieces of work, some types of work, like research, for example, you go month or 2 months. The dynamics around what you're doing don't shift and change, and you don't have to react coordination, like software development, the idea is really you can show pieces to the client, right? So the origin of Scrum was agile development, and the idea was being agile, like being able to show the client pieces of software, deliver things, and then then do this introspection to see what went right, what went well, and be able to adapt each sprint. So it's part of the agile framework. And for what we're using it for the stewardship and for work streams in the TEC is really just coordination. So what we plan for this sprint might change next week when there's some new thing that happened, some new piece of information we have that now we need to adapt what our plan was. So the purpose of Scrum is to be adaptable, introspective, and transparent. Those are like the 3 pillars of Scrum. So I think what piece we are missing is like, well, what are our goals for the quarter? And OKRs, or objectives and key results, like that's one method we can use to say, okay, every quarter we'll come together and have agree on what our objectives are and how we measure them. And then we can use our sprint planning to support those goals. I think that seems like it seems to me like a good direction to move in. But I also think we do need to make our sprint planning more focused. I think we need to be like the common sprint planning, and then other working groups can have other working group, but I think we would disservice ourselves if we continue to try to make it all working groups in the TEC in one sprint planning.
I agree with that assessment. I feel like having the commons focused retrospective and sprint planning would be way more helpful. And then leaving the micromanagement of each individual working group, or even tasks that are not relevant necessarily for the objective of the commons, being managed by their own working groups in their own work streams. But that, for me, it should come also with this very clear layout of method for working groups to understand how they can take advantage of this, because I feel this methodology really worked for us when we launched the token and all that process, but it sort of we dropped a little bit the ball with that. So I felt it became more of a cultural, routinary thing to do rather than an effective necessarily process. So yeah. Does anyone have any other comment regarding this? 5, 4, 3.
I guess I'd have to ask about the access thing again. If we're the only ones, the stewards in particular, who are going to be participating in this actual organizing the planning stuff, and we kind of leave the contributors outside of it, does that defeat the intention of what we're trying to accomplish? And yeah, I think the accessibility thing's the issue, but.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. Let me try to answer this actually, because I agree with you. And the purpose of using GitHub and using ZenHub and making it open so anyone can open an issue was exactly to allow people to open issues if they saw work that they wanted to do. And that works sometimes, but mostly doesn't work, is maybe something that we could look at how to fix that particular thing. But I don't think this model is closed. I don't think it's closed access. I think this model remains open access. It's just the real question is, how do we get contributors to, put forth their ideas in the sprint board? Maybe they're shy to open an issue in the sprint board. Maybe there should be a forum where we can form like a space where we can take contributors' ideas and help them put them in this. I mean, maybe it happens in a working group. Each working group helps their contributors put ideas into the sprint board. But I would say I don't think it's closed. So can you help me understand? Just I want to understand better, more specifically, what access
Yeah,
might be in jeopardy. Yeah.
I think most of the part is like, knowledge. Most people come in and they want to participate, but they're afraid to put it on the board because they're not sure their time capacity to contribute to that effort. They just know that it needs to be done. And so like a lot of issues that we do have are kind of aspirational almost. Not really, tangible in terms of that 2-week sprint period. And so a lot of people hesitate on even putting it up there. And it's like, do we have this kind of sprint board that's just filled with issues that are kind of like, this is what we'd like to do, rather than this is exactly what we're going to be doing these next 2 weeks. I think that's really hard to have people participate in, understanding, because we do it from an individual perspective and not from a working group perspective. And so I think if you had like 2 or 3 people who were like, yeah, let's do this, I think it would work a lot better. Knowing that you have support to execute on that particular issue. I think, I don't know, I look at the sprint board now and I see, the same 5 or 6 people who actively participate in creating the issues and going about it. And it doesn't mean that work is not being done in the background by other contributors for other issues. They're just not being put on the sprint board, And so how do we convey from the work that's being done in the working groups, especially if we're moving away from like working group stewards, to be conveyed into the overall community planning?
I wonder if we could. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Libby. I guess I'm so if I understand correctly what's being, because it seems like there's a few ideas that are floating around here, but if I'm understanding correctly, there's one idea which is like let's keep more of the kind of coordination within working groups and focus this the kind of the commons level coordination on a slightly different sprint process that we're still defining. And then we're talking about possibly also then having some kind of longer term set of goals that drive that process. And then I think I'm also detecting something, Nate, that is within what you're saying too, which is I've noticed this too, like Zen Hub, not that accessible, right? Like most people don't really know how to do that. When they come in the first time, it's pretty overwhelming. And I think rather than trying to train the community on how to use Zen Hub, that that there may be some simpler like sense making things, right? Like for example, Polis, we use Polis with some interesting effect. Like it actually seemed to be kind of a good listening device. And maybe there's a way for us to, once a quarter, basically put out some type of poll where we seed it, the stewards seed the poll with like, here are all the things that we think are interesting and important right now. But as you know, like the way that Polis works, you can get you can get actual people weighing in on the stuff that's been put in there, but then they can add stuff to it, right? And it's a pretty simple user interface. And my guess is that most of the community doesn't really want to get that sucked into the nitty-gritty of the decision-making process. They would probably like more to just kind of weigh in on the high level like directional piece and be able to give their advice and give their perspective. That's my sense anyways.
I wonder if it would be interesting for us to invert the process of accountability somehow, that people don't tell in advance what they're going to do, but that they report after they did something, that they did that something. And then we would have some type of documented database of everything that was done. And then maybe there can be some type of, I don't know, rewards on top of it, or I don't know, maybe it's a broad idea, but I wonder if asking people to put down what they're going to do before they do in something that is somehow formal creates a resistance.
I will say that the SynHub, as we were talking, the SynHub and GitHub has presented sort of a barrier for folks. I think that also SynHub at the state that it is currently, it's a lot of information to visualize, and people gets lost. So before when it was only Septi and I and Nate on this call, we talk about like simplifying to maybe do another board that has only the commons focus objective season, or having a Notion board, because the advantage of Notion is that you can easily make it open, or low barrier. I don't have to give you access to GitHub to then teach you how to use SendHub. So something that could be something else, but something that could provide this will be really helpful. But I do feel, and I strongly feel, that we will certain level of not commitment, but at least accountability format or process that everyone can follow and understand. So like what Lily mentioned, like having this issue after you finished, or having that posted before. It doesn't matter if it's for me. I don't think it changes much. It changes much, but I think it's helpful to make sure that we don't lose this practice of keeping track of things. I think that's one of the things that I think SendHub and GitHub are really useful for.
Honka, is that the Getty 70 thoughts?
It's, for me, it's hard, like, because it's like, it resonates with me, like, having a commons direction, but then what's the point of having work streams that are not following this common direction? For me, it's more interesting to put the resources to accomplish those goals, rather than say, okay, those are the goals we're doing, and then these other things are happening because conviction voting. I don't know, like, I feel like we can do better than that, but I don't have strong arguments, so that's why I was silent.
Just quickly on that, no, there will be things, for example, concealance library, or that will take more time. Last time I mentioned, there are things that research that will take way more time, or maybe less time than the commons sort of focus, and that could be beneficial for the ecosystem. Or, for example, Twitter, something that happens every week, doesn't necessarily we'll see the big scheme of the commons, but not necessarily it's a different work stream. Like if you have to research, design something for Twitter and so on, these are work streams that still happens and will still happen, but that doesn't mean that they are they have the same kind of alignment with the commons, not in the sense of they have a value alignment, they have all of this, but they will have different rhythm, let's say.
Yeah, I don't know. What if we want to change how we use Twitter? Like, I don't know. It feels like it's fall apart. So it
Then
feels
we
like
change
it's. Yeah, but what if someone wants to change it, but the people who's running it doesn't want to?
But this is a different conversation that has nothing to do with different work streams.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying is, like, like, you are making things independent, which is good, but at the same time, I mean, I guess you still have to vote on conviction voting every once. So I guess that's fine.
So I guess, could we put this as the the main issue that we all swarm to in terms of going through the advice process and articulating a new vision for sprint planning? I feel like we still are kind of in different realms and thinking in terms of like how best to move forward with sprint planning. But I don't know. I would like to have something in the works for the sprint regarding this topic, but I'm not exactly sure what form that will take. Yeah, go ahead, Tam.
I think that's something you and I can do together, don't you think? And then maybe share it with the rest of the stewards and get some feedback.
Yeah, I mean, if everybody's okay with that, I think that would be a really good idea in terms of just go through the advice process with this as a minimum first step.
But I also
Yes.
want to say, I think they're tightly linked. The transformation of the stewardship and coordination are intertwined. But I think that they both are super important.
I
But yeah,
agree.
but I think we can say that's something that Nate and I should take on, and rather than 10 people, or how many people are in this call, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, rather than 7 people working independently trying to do the same thing, maybe we can sort of consolidate all of it and make that something a task that you and I make a proposal for. Hello, hi. Oh, Kepler is so big. What a sweet surprise.
Kepler wants to participate.
I think Kepler should be
You should take the lead on this one, right? Yeah.
So sweet.
I'm down with that. And yeah, so do we want to just do like a forum post once we have the steward stuff idea of what's going to happen there?
Yeah, I think that's what makes sense. And with priority, I mean, my time constraint is I have 2 weeks, and then I am mostly unavailable for the following 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
Yeah, so we'll make the most of it. And I guess if we could all just contribute to the comments on the forum, just to have a community discussion about it as well, once we've articulated it. And Tam, I know you have like a better clarity around the feature of that form. But yeah.
Does anyone feels anything against or feedback or anything they want to comment regarding this idea just before anything? 5, 4, 3, 2.
I want to
Okay.
say something.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that I think that the tools we've used so far have made good results, because we've gotten to this point. So I think like the Zen Hub, I understand the complexity of like having multiple pages and multiple platforms, but I still believe that Zen Hub could help us progress more. And I think that the coordination it's not only like thinking on the platform, but thinking also on the availability and the presence and the closeness that we have as a group. And I think that not only thinking about the platforms, but thinking also about the closeness in the group, it's something that would be very interesting, because sometimes I feel that we have been growing a little bit distance between the working groups, and it's not only the platforms. And if we see that in the following weeks we're gonna have less participation from from some people, we should prepare for that and do what we can before, and yeah, try to give a step up, even if we have to make an extraordinary meeting just to gather up and feel close together, stewards get together or something. I don't know.
And the next thing you're going to say is like in Bogota, right?
Yeah.
And I also wanted to ask a question. What do you think we should do with the sprint planning board right now? Do we need to fresh slate? Do we need to?
How is everyone else feeling? How does everyone? It's a great question. Sorry to interrupt you. How is everyone feeling about that? Do we skip this sprint? Do we plan this sprint in the next 30, 60 minutes?
I think transparency can be skipped. It's like what I have to do, I know, and I plan to, close all my issues before leaving. So the idea is like, yeah, my work stream gets done and then it's done.
And then I want to say one of the big benefits of sprint planning is we talk about the issues and then we're just like, oh yeah, and gravity, I need this from you. Or like, is there anything that anyone wants? I mean, do we want to, here's the other, like, what do we do with this sprint plan? Maybe we skip it. The other thing is maybe we talk about our working groups in conversation, discussion format. So skip the board planning itself, or we do the board planning itself, or we just have a conversation around our working groups and whether we have any needs from other. Yeah, Wonka, I feel the same actually. Most of my issues are the same too. So maybe I will pass it around. Maybe pass to Livia to kick us off of the best use of this time now.
Yeah, and for me, I feel like my work is a little bit on that realm that Gideon was talking about, that is hard to have specific issues for. And it seems that there is something a little more long-term evolving, because I think there is this cultural shift happening, and it feels like I have to understand things first. I don't know. And then there's things emerging out of the SoftGov meetings, and I was just making a survey now, thinking about like TC stakeholder signal. What are some questions that we could ask to the community? Maybe it's something I'll work on and pass to you guys for feedback. And I'll pass to Edu.
So the question is, what do we do with the rest of the time today? Is that correct?
Yeah. So like skip sprint planning and just have a conversation around what our working groups are working on and whether we have any interdependent needs, or do the sprint planning.
Yeah, I wouldn't do the sprint planning. I think the conversation today has weighed enough into how this needs to be sort of redo. So I will just follow this general consent on anyone who has a priority or want to express a priority for this next weeks to express it, and we can sort of build based on that. And I will pass it on to Gideon.
Thanks, Edu. Yeah, I feel like we do like pretty intensive project planning in Sampo, so it does feel like kind of duplicated. I mean, it feels a little bit. To be honest, it feels a little bit like make work to kind of like surface it up here again and track it here too. But having said that, I still like. I think that there's like a super valuable role for doing inter-working group coordination. Like that doesn't go away, right? Like so I think I would say like for this call, like yeah, let's for me skip the detailed sprint planning, but I think it's useful to kind of look at, like, for instance, if you were to ask me like over the next 2 months, what do you see coming from the Sampo work where I could really use some help from other working groups? I could tell you like boom, there are definitely some things, right? And I bet that each of us probably have some similar perspectives. So yeah, I'll pass it to Zeptimus.
Thanks, Gideon. Yeah, for me, I mean, I also think like we should skip the details. I strongly feel like we mostly have same issues with closing issues. Like most people's living. So yeah, I really think we should keep talking. Like I all this call, I was keep thinking like how we like even change like we should even think like are working groups serving the common or are it delaying? Like there's many questions. So I really, really, really agree what Livy and Nick were talking about, like, having issues voting on them. So the token holders are deciding what to get done and then using our resources, which is the people, to get those issues done. Something around those lines I'm still thinking, but I don't have a process. But yeah, I think we could keep talking about future. I don't know. I'll pass it to Libby.
Pass to Nate.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's, especially within the sample working group and 12th Rune policy group right now, I think is a good example of like why we need the cross working group, coordination. And, we have a lot of issues where like I want to go through the process of ratifying this policy document. I want to go through the process of putting this the investment strategy up to a vote. And this is something that SoftGov could definitely help with. So it's not on a single person. And then there's like elements of transparency where like I'm having to coordinate with Septimus in the background on setting up HAL and making sure that we're on the same page in terms of like what parts of this treasury policy is going to be incorporating transparency and those things, where instead of me doing this in the background and back channels, that we do this out in the open publicly, and how we coordinate this within the issues within this call. And so I think that that's a really interesting issue and something that we could bring to the front, because it'd be like, we come to the sprint planning and say, hey, this is what I need right now. I have this initiative that I'm trying to accomplish, but I do need help with other working groups. I do need help, presenting this in a way on Snapshot. I do need help presenting this in a way on our TAL voting. And what is the process for that? What do I need to go through to get that done? And having somebody there to actually pick up that piece and execute on it would be really helpful. And so I think that's a huge aspect right now for what we need in the treasury policy and the treasury formation stuff. After we go through this week of advice process on the forum, and I introduce the first investment strategy. And so I guess figuring out a way to use the sprint planning for that purpose, for that cross, dependency purpose, where I'm like, hey, how can you guys help me out with this? I think would go a long way to being more efficient and more productive as a community in helping out with these initiatives. So as of right now, yeah, I think that I would like to add that as a kind of an issue and see where we can all pitch in. But yeah, I'll pass it over to Juanca.
Thanks, Nate. Well, in Gravity, we are now with 25 neo-gravitons, and some of the things that I am seeing is that, okay, we now have a lot of people that is trained, and some of them willing to actually mediate cases, but right now I've seen a decrease on the number of cases. So normally we were having like around 1 or 2 cases per month, but this past month things have gone slowly too. So I think it would be good to be able to outreach other communities, to receive more cases, to have like more dynamic on this motor of people taking cases to provide the service that we want to provide. And I also think that something that I think that could be worked on is like, how can we offer TEC services as a bundle, but also the individual services from the working groups, to tailor the needs of possible clients. Maybe there's a client that would like all of the TC services. Maybe there's a client that would like only sample guidance, or like stewardship guidance, or onboarding and offboarding guidance, or softgov guidance. I think that we all have developed products that it would be really cool to be able to offer and to have defined as each group an individual service, but also the TEC as a bundle. I think, yeah, that conversation once started, but we can retake it. And I think that we are really good with our educational offering. I really liked the third Graviton training, and I know that now we have new topics to add to another Graviton training. but it's always like we don't only want to be an educational offering, but also to provide a service. And now we need more cases, we need more people actively engaging with the type firm and asking for support in conflicts. I mean, I haven't received an input in the type form for like 2 weeks, and I think it's the longest time that I haven't received an input in the type form for a long time.
And so I guess I'm the last one to go. So about the coordination layers and sprint planning and what we do about it, I'd say if we look at for designing any system, I think we start from what our goals are and what our requirements are. And then from the requirements, we could sort of build a system. I think Scrum was a choice that we made because of the transparency, introspection, adaptation. It's very agile, and it provides a lot of the values that TEC holds dear. But I think, maybe what we've been missing all this time is a suggestion box to make it easier for suggestions about what we can do in the sprint planning. I think community participation, is that a requirement? Is it a nice to have? Raising working group participation, is that a requirement? Like what are all of our requirements? And then we can actually design the system that meets those requirements rather than designing different things without knowing what our requirements are first. And then, I'm not necessarily tied to ZenHub or even GitHub, but I think that the Scrum framework has indeed been very advantageous in what it provides. I think if just out of this conversation and all the different perspectives, the two things that would enhance it would be quarterly OKRs or even biannual OKRs. So what are our goals for that 6-month period? And some way to facilitate communities' suggestions. And whether that makes it onto the sprint board or not, who knows, but just a way for I guess I'm very sensitive to this idea that contributors feel that they don't really have access to participate in contributing work to a work stream. And if it's ZenHub that's blocking that, maybe we need something else, But yeah, I guess the long and short of it is I think it's also really tied to the stewardship transformation and, having commons stewards and working group stewards and advisory team, I think is really important in that coordination layer too, because the coordination layer is not just like what tools we use, but the cadence for our meetings and what each of these groups' responsibilities are. And that's going to involve the kinds of coordination meetings that they would attend. And I think I look forward to taking a crack at this with Nate.
And could I ask, what would an OKR look like? I mean, is it these larger goals, or is it actually tangible things?
They're specific. So grow revenue by 50%, and then it's just like, how are the different ways that you can actually do that? So they're very concrete and measurable. So for the TEC, find sustainable revenue model, and then really specifically revenue model for treasury, revenue model for other components through Gravity services or through other services that we may be able to build. Does that sort of make sense?
Yeah. And I guess the actions right now are, we'll go through the advice process in articulating this to the community. And then with the current sprint board, should we just say, if review all your issues, and if it's not necessary, just go ahead and take it out. Let's clean it up as much as possible. Or should we go one by one real quick?
One more time?
Whether we should go one by one through each of these issues, or just have each steward, or if you have an issue open right now in this call, go through them and see if it's necessary. If not, close them and we'll clean it up a little bit.
I would propose we leave it as is, actually, for this sprint. I think this call was very useful and productive. I don't think that if we spend all our time going one through the issues and closing them, it would feel as productive to us. I think that the discussion that came out of this was super valuable, honestly. And unless there's an overwhelming, I mean, it seemed to be pretty consensus. I think most people agreed that not going through the sprint board today. So in my perspective, I'd say we just the sprint is on pause. This 2-week period, I think everyone knows what they're doing. The working groups are doing their coordinations mostly in the working groups, and that we can pick this up. And then we can pick this up in a future sprint or have a proposal for how to change coordination before the next one, which seems really tight to do, actually. So maybe it's like we pause a few sprints.
That sounds good.
Really super unexpected sprint planning, but I think this conversation was a really good one, and I really super appreciate everyone who spent time sharing their perspective today.
Likewise.
Okay, maybe like what is it called? A quick fire. What are you looking forward to most this weekend before we hop off the call? Unless there's anything else anybody wants to share.
I just want to share something real quick, Tam. And
Sure.
what I think is that each group has successfully developed a string of work that any DAO could benefit from. So I think that there's a lot of value that we can continue voicing it and making it loud, so that the things that we did for ourselves, we can support others do them, because sometimes it's difficult to continue doing in the same community, because sometimes what we did was done, and sometimes each thing has its momentum, and maybe that's why I think that some of the working groups could benefit from trying to see how can they apply their developed string of work in other community, thinking that maybe it's something that we can iterate on, and not like a continuous thing that we can always do in the TEC. And it's just my thinking.
So shall we do a quick fire round of like what you're looking forward to? Okay, so thank you for sharing that, Wonka. I don't exactly share that perspective, but I also think that a working group that feels that they have something to share with other DAOs is definitely would be encouraged to develop that kind of practice, like Gravity did. I think Gravity set a good example of that, actually. Does anyone else have anything else they want to share? Okay. Then, Nate, will you share what you're looking forward to most this weekend?
Yeah, sure. I'm going to hang out at First Fridays with this little guy tonight, which is going to be great. It's like an art festival here in Oakland. It happens every first Friday. And we're just going to go check out some artwork and hang out until he passes out. And then this weekend, we're just going to hang as well. So good. He's growing a lot, and it's a lot of fun, him starting to move around more. But yeah, it'll be cool. And I'll pass it over to Gideon.
Thanks, Nate. So cool to see Kepler there. I just love that age, man. I miss it. Also, just an appreciation to the two of you. I am so glad that you're digging into this. Like, I feel like there's just a bunch of stuff that we're changing, and I love the fact that you two are so focused on trying to make sure that we're coordinating in the right way as an organization. Thank you. I'm looking forward to a walk tonight with CJ, my wife. We do this pretty regularly, but it's just like perfect weather today here in Seattle, so I'm really looking forward to that. I will pass to Zepti.
Thanks, Gideon. I'm also going on a walk. Actually, in half an hour, I'll go with Sam. Place that it's called La Punta del Duc. Yeah, it's a pretty lovely place here in the village. It's like you get into the car to the mountain, and then it's like 1 hour, 1 hour and a half walk. Yeah, the views are great, and yeah, one thing I'm really looking forward is getting the audit finished this weekend. It's needed. I'll pass it to Nate.
And I'll pass it over to Wonka.
Thanks, Nate. Yeah, I've been taking it slow this week. So I will continue taking it slow this weekend. I maybe will go out sometime in the night a little bit, but like staying in my house, chilling, taking benefit and the best of these slow times, because after the calm comes the storm, and I know that at some point we will be full of work as we were as we were, and full of coordination and life as we were, and yeah, just hanging out with Danny and chilling, maybe playing some video games. How about you, Gideon?
Gideon did go talk already, and I'm jealous if everyone's walking actually. So I think this weekend I'll find a nice walk to take too. The kids have a lot of plans, so I feel like we're doing a lot of hanging out with their friends, families, basically. So it should be fun. But it's really hot in Bordeaux, so it's sort of like a little trying, these days. Cool. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Nate for facilitating so well. And
Have a great weekend.
Thanks,
Good
everyone.
conversation. Thank you, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.
See you later.
Have a good weekend, everyone. Bye.
Yeah.